Welcome into a Thursday edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Nick Whalen in for John McKechnie, hosting with my guy Mario Puig. Mario, a lot to get to on today's episode. We got some injury news out of Los Angeles. We're going to be talking some of the biggest job battles to keep an eye on as we head into the official start of the preseason tonight. We'll be telling you about all of our wonderful sponsors as the show goes along, but we're brought to you by Circa. We're brought to you by Vegas Football Proxy, as well as Commish Again, you'll be hearing more about those later in the show. But Mario, I do want to start out with the Rashawn Slater news that broke when you and I were on SiriusXM earlier today. You know, details still trickling out, but unfortunately, we hit all the hallmarks of a serious injury in camp. You know, the cart's out, the towel's over the head, he slammed the helmet down. There was reports that he couldn't put any weight on his left leg. Too early to say anything for sure. Obviously, we're hoping for the best for Rashawn Slater, but this could be a huge, huge blow to the Chargers O-line.
Right. They paid him the way that they did because Slater is one of the best left tackles in the game, probably something like top 5 conservatively. It's a big loss no matter what when you don't have a player like that all of a sudden. But if there's good news, well, it's like, the balance of the universe type stuff. It's good that Slater got paid before he got hurt, like at least that was the sequence rather than get hurt, then don't get a contract extension because you're hurt. So there's that for him at least. The other thing is Joe Alt he played right tackle last year because Slater is basically immovable as a left tackle. Alt should be able to just move to the left side. And as a left tackle prospect, he was, just highly distinguished. Like if he was drafted by almost any other team, like any team other than the Chargers and like the Buccaneers, Alt would have been a left tackle already. So hopefully he can just keep this hopefully Slater doesn't actually miss as much time as we're kind of fearing. But whatever amount of time Slater might miss, Alt should be able to sort of, more or less replace him. It's right tackle you'd almost have to worry about it only because Alt would be moved to the left.
Right. Could be Trey Pipkins, could be Ryan Nelson, Corey Stewart. Those are your reserve tackles on that Chargers roster. But, if we assume that this is as serious as it looks to be, does this do anything for you as far as how you value Omari and Hampton? Does it worry you at all as far as Herbert goes?
It might be fair to have some level of concern over it that you adjust your rankings. I probably won't. I feel like it's just a little difficult to pin down the kind of certainties we would need to, especially when it's a player like Hampton, who I think is like a really standout talent who's headed for a big workload. You'd hate to pass on Hampton because he maybe averages like 0.3 fewer yards per carry in a year where he's pushing for 300 carries. So it's one of those things, and this is always frustrating, but it's one of those things where you can't do much about it, in my opinion, other than just sort of worry about it. And that's obviously not that fun.
All right, well, let's talk about something more fun. We got position battles to work through, Mario. You wrote a great piece, which is up right now over at rotowire.com. Hit the site on Wednesday, taking a look at the fantasy impact from some of those biggest position battles. So we'll start with the LA Chargers. And I think the wide receiver group beyond Ladd McConkey was already a big question mark. Now you're throwing Keenan Allen into the mix at age 33. How do you kind of handicap the situation behind McConkey, whether it's Trey Harris, Quentin Johnston, Keenan Allen?
It's a signing that I think is primarily about depth from the Chargers' point of view. It's good, of course, to have a legend, team legend, good culture guy like Keenan Allen back in the fold. But in terms of the on-field contributions, his best days have clearly been past for at least 1 year. And now he's either going to be turning 34 or 33 and a half. 33 and a half is, I think, what it is in October for Allen. So he's already 33. In other words, he was a guy who was slow when he came into the league. Allen was a great receiver, of course, but he would win with route running and winning at the catch point, stuff like that. He was timed in the 4.7 range coming out of California. That he was probably running that on a bad knee. He had a PCL thing at the time, but this is a guy who might be running something like a 4.8 40 at this point at his current age. And I just don't think Allen can function from the boundary, and especially not at downfield depths like he needs to do his damage Just in a chain moving kind of fashion. But to the Chargers, in addition to the culture reasons and everything else, it's helpful to add Allen because McConkey, if nothing else, McConkey has had a lot of durability troubles, and you could see last year when McConkey was unavailable, it was just kind of like we can't do anything until next week at the soonest. Whereas this time around, if McConkey leaves a game because he bruised his quad or something and he's got to sit out for 2 quarters, the Chargers have a prayer at least of getting some first downs, because from the slot, from low depths, Allen should still all that know-how that he has should still play there, even with his loss of speed at this point. But I don't see Allen stealing boundary snaps. So guys like Trey Harris, Quentin Johnston, I don't see Allen as an obvious threat to them. The way it could go wrong for either of Harris or Johnston, though, and I would sooner assume Johnston than Harris, is if the Chargers start moving McConkey out of the slot to the flanker rep, thus pushing one of Johnston or Harris to the bench in that 3 wide set. So that could happen, but Keenan Allen really struggled last year for the Bears. Like, he had 2 actually good games. Both were against the Lions, because he was against 5'8" Amick Robertson, and he would kind of bully him, even though he couldn't get open. It was just like, what's he going to do? He's 5'8". So outside of that particular very specific situation, Allen basically was not helpful for the Bears last year. And I think he's more just quality depth at this point, and only from the slot, rather than like a guy who's going to change the complexion of the offense.
If you had to draft one of the non-McConkey receivers, late, would you take Keenan Allen, or would you chance it on Trey Harris or Quentin Johnston? I suppose that is an option.
They all have their cases, I guess. It's especially given Johnston, no one really knows which way it's going to go with him. We especially don't know the way it's going to go with Harris, especially as a rookie, one who missed some training camp time due to the second round holdout fiascos. So Harris may very well be a when not if kind of player, but the when part is still very much unclear. I think we can say Johnston is more of an if player than a when player. And again, McConkey has a long list of durability troubles going back to Georgia. Like, he gets doorbell. He gets nicked up a good amount, and when he's out, the Chargers just have nothing over the middle. And if McConkey is out, it's easy to imagine Allen getting 10 targets on 60 snaps or something.
I think the dog is a Keenan Allen fan. I think he's officially weighed in on this discussion. As far as Keenan Allen goes, some of the early ADPs coming out since that signing, seeing him go off the board somewhere between, wide receiver 54, wide receiver 60. So that's putting him in that, Christian Kirk, Darnell Mooney, Rashid Shaheed, Marvin Mims zone. Does that feel about right to you?
It's one of those picks I'm probably not going to make, but I can see the theory of it. I wouldn't tell anyone they're wrong for figuring something to the effect of, well, I'd rather have Keenan Allen than Marvin Mims, because Keenan Allen has more upside. Even if it takes McConkey getting hurt, Allen has more upside because of who he has generally been in the NFL and who Justin Herbert is. I don't know. Maybe I'm too high on McConkey and even guys like Trey Harris to give proper due to the possibility of Allen being like an 80 catch player this year or something like that. But I don't know. I just don't think there's much there. And when I try to imagine the best case scenarios for Allen, which are bad, which are bad case scenarios for the Chargers, mind you, because they're almost all scenarios where some other receiver got hurt. I just don't think anything but reception count and like targets per snap is on the table. So PPR, it's a little easier for me to see the Allen upside case, because I do think he could catch something, like 7 or 8 passes in a game if McConkey is not playing in that game. I just also struggle to imagine those catches going for something more than, like 9 yards a catch or something like that.
All right, we'll talk New York Giants backfield in just a moment, but first tell you about a couple of our sponsors. Circa Million and Circa Survivor contests are back with a massive $21 million in guaranteed prizes this season. In Circa Million, you pick 5 games against the spread each week, 18 weeks of action with 126 ways to win. You get $1 million go to the winner, and $6 million are guaranteed throughout the contest. Circa Survivor, you know the drill there. 1 pick per week, no point spread, last the longest to win it all, at least $15 million guaranteed this season. Enter in Nevada, play from anywhere, $21 million guaranteed. Visit circusports.com for all the details. And hey, if you need a proxy, if you can't get to Vegas to input your picks each week for Circa Million, check out Vegas Football Proxy. Do you want to enter the greatest pro football contest in the world? The Circa Million and Circa Survivor contests in Nevada are offering $21 million in prize money, and Vegas Football Proxy can help you play in these awesome contests. Vegas Football Proxy is based in Las Vegas and offers proxy services for customers all over the country. Sign up at the Circa Resort and Casino in Las Vegas and then play from anywhere with Vegas Football Proxy. The folks at VFP are experienced professionals. They're 100% reliable and provide outstanding customer service. Their submission process is easy to use and ensures accurate and timely pick submissions. Tom Carroll and his team at VFP have been serving contest players for more than a decade and have helped countless clients achieve their dreams, from just being able to compete in a Vegas contest all the way to winning Circa Survivor. If you want to take a shot at $21 million in guaranteed prize money, visit vegasfootballproxy.com/rotopod. That's ROTOPOD. vegasfootballproxy.com/rotopod. Put that in. You can see all the details. All right, Mario, let's talk some New York Giants. You broke down this backfield in the article you could find over at rotowire.com. We got some news on our show on SiriusXM earlier this week. Jordan Renan of ESPN gave a very definitive claim that this is Tyrone Tracy's backfield. Now, Camp Skattebo's missed some time. He's been banged up in camp. Certainly that's part of the equation. I don't distrust that report by any means. It's just a question of, okay, if Tyrone Tracy does open the season as the Giants starting running back, how long can we depend on that being the case?
It's a situation, I think, that could break a lot of different ways, in part because both Tracy and Skattebo are fallible in their own ways, and might not be, especially in my opinion, Tracy is probably not a true workhorse. To me, Tracy is more ideally a guy you try to set up for big play shots, the in-space kind of plays. On 3rd and 1, 3rd and inches, I think Skattebo clearly has a power advantage. Like, he's got much better anchor, sets his center of gravity very low, and runs like an absolutely crazy person. I mean, Cam Skattebo is pretty much a crazy person, and he plays like it. He has that kind of unreasonable aggression that can pay off in these physical situations. And I just think, particularly when the two players complement each other to that extent. And by the way, Tracy's compliment to Skattebo is that Skattebo is very slow. Like, he runs at 4.7, and Tracy's not exactly a burner, but he's above average speed and much faster than Skattebo. So you can imagine over the course of a game, over the course of a season, the Giants running into situations where they feel the need to call upon both players for different reasons. I do think, though, Tracy needs to fumble less than he did last year. He would ideally be a little better between the tackles than he was last year. And if he does turn those corners, he could be tough to send to the bench. Like, if so, I'm assuming Tyrone Tracy is just not a particularly powerful runner, for instance. If Tracy gets to week 1 and he's grinding between the tackles, and he's setting anchor and meeting these collisions in force and holding up with it, admittedly, at that point, Tracy wouldn't really have a whole lot of weaknesses, if any. Like, at that point, he'd be a pretty complete running back. So I'm assuming Skattebo will get his foot in the door at some point, but that's assuming, of course, A, that Skattebo gets healthy soonish, and B, it's assuming Tracy is more or less the same guy that he was last year. And B might be a hasty assumption, because Tyrone Tracy is only in his 3rd year playing running back after playing receiver at Iowa and Purdue. And it is totally possible that he sort of just keeps developing his skill set as a running back. But a thing going for both of these guys, in my opinion, is that the Giants, the longer Russell Wilson starts in particular, the Giants will have to check down to the running backs a lot. Like, you saw Javonte Williams, Jaylen Warren getting plenty of targets. Of course, Javonte Williams got a ton of targets when Russell Wilson was with the Broncos, because he's either going high or low, basically, and he's not going over the middle, and he's not going intermediate. So if it's not a moonball shot down the sideline, it's probably a check down either to a receiver on the boundary or a running back in the flats. So Skattebo, by the way, is a really good receiver to the point that I would say he's actually a better pass catcher than Tracy is, even though Tracy's a former actual wide receiver. But Russell Wilson, if he's throwing the ball 35 times in a game, you assume, I guess, 12 to 15 of those goes to Neighbors, 5 or 6 goes to Slayton. The rest pretty much might go to the running backs. So in PPR scoring, it's definitely worth keeping. It's worth having both of these guys, or sorry, not on like the same team, but it's worth drafting either of Tracy or Skattebo. And even if it's not, popping off right away, especially for Skattebo, like just hold on to him, because I do think the Giants are going to just settle into this kind of offensive approach where if it's not going to Neighbors or Slayton, it's going to the running back, and both of those guys might go over 40 catches this year.
So we have seen a notable jump in ADP already for Tyrone Tracy over the last couple of days. I've isolated the last 3 days at the NFFC. Now the running back 28, average pick of 84 overall. He's gone as high as 58. I don't know who's taking that 58. Certainly not
That's
me.
Too
but
high.
that puts him about a half round behind Aaron Jones. It puts him ahead of Brian Robinson, well ahead of guys like Jordan Mason and Jaylen Warren. Are you buying that price? Because as great as this news may be, as far as, okay, we think we know who the number one running back is, it's still the New York Giants.
Yeah, I'd prefer Mason and Warren straight up, but to be fair to the people who are drafting Tracy at his new elevated ADP, that is a bit of a running back dead zone in my opinion, or at least I have very little interest in drafting Brian Robinson types. I would need to be more like in the hunt for like Pacheco and DeAndre Swift types. Otherwise, Tracy to me is more, I would say, a round 10 kind of pick, and I could just easily be wrong about that. If I'm overestimating Skattebo's involvement, then I almost certainly will be wrong about that. I just think I think it's going to be a split workload where like the tasks are assigned based on the abilities of the players, and it's Skattebo has some strengths that Tyrone Tracy doesn't, and vice versa. But I think especially if you're doing a lot of drafts, it makes some sense to try to pursue some Tracy exposure, sort of just in case he does go off. But I don't know. Like in the case of Warren, I'm pretty sure he's going to play all the passing downs this year for the Steelers, and I could easily see him catching 60 plus passes. In the case of Mason, I expect him to be the primary goal line back and primary like just ball carrier in general, honestly, for the Vikings. So I value those two more, but I probably would take Tracy over Robinson and even Aaron Jones, actually.
We're also brought to you by Commish Kit. It's fantasy football draft season, and Commish Kit has you covered. Now in their 24th season, Commish Kit is the only brand with corrugated, digital, and paper draft boards. Commish Kit doesn't take themselves too seriously, but they do take your draft day seriously. See why draft day hits different with Commish Kit. Visit commishkit.com today. Use the promo code ROTO, ROTO, for 10% off. Again, put in that code ROTO over at commishkit.com. All right, Mario, let's stick with the backfield theme. And things get even more convoluted when you move on to the Dallas Cowboys, another team in the NFC East. Javonte Williams in the mix, Miles Sanders in the mix, Jaydon Boutte, the rookie fourth rounder, also in the mix. In terms of updated ADPs, we're seeing Javonte Williams as the RB36, Jaydon Boutte not far behind at RB38. Nobody seems to be drafted Miles Sanders, RB70 in the last week at the NFFC.
Yeah, this is a weird backfield for sure, and I understand the reasoning of the Jaydon Boutte optimist. I just have to kind of assume the people pushing the Jaydon Boutte market don't watch football that much. And are kind of deferring to things like, well, he's got the freshest draft capital of this group, and Javonte Williams is dust, and Miles Sanders is dust, so it's obviously going to be this rookie because dust running backs can't hold off rookies, and it's just like that's not even like a true statement at all. Dust running backs hold off sometimes clearly better players, and I don't think there's any basis to assume Jaydon Boutte will be better than Javonte Williams or Miles Sanders in any capacity, except in the case of only Sanders, pass catching. Big playability, of course, too, but that's I don't know how to say this exactly. Like, being fast alone is only worth so much. Jaydon Boutte, of course, is a big play threat. He can split the safeties. If they leave him a wide open gap, he'll run through it, and he's not going to get caught by many defenders if that happens. But that doesn't happen that much. He will have Jaydon Boutte, in my opinion, will have a limited assortment of play calls where he's even a consideration for the Cowboys, especially any power concept. Like 3rd and 1, forget it. That you're asking for him to drop the ball or get clobbered on a play like that. So you're going to give it to Javonte Williams or Miles Sanders or even Phil Maffa, maybe somebody like that. Definitely think we're done with Deuce Vaughn. That never really should have been a thing, and it wouldn't have been if his dad didn't work for the team. So Vaughn's not a problem. Maffa, as much as I think he has a certain narrow path to relevance, it's much narrower than Jaydon Blue's. And of course, in this era of PPR scoring, Jaydon Boutte is the kind of guy who, because he can be a good pass catcher, he could give you some good flex weeks, even if he has a cap of like 8 carries or something, which he will, by the way, because the only way you can get Jaydon Boutte to something like 15 carries in a game is to run like 8 draws and just like tosses and plays like that, because you're not giving him a halfback dive with Hunter Luepke leading the way. Like, it's just not, unless you want to get Boutte clobbered or have him drop the football. You just don't give him that play. It's going to the other 3 instead. For what it's worth, Miles Sanders is not getting paid very much. It's probably close to the veteran minimum, but if I remember right, it's pretty much all guaranteed. So it sure looks like the Cowboys had Sanders identified as like, he's our running back 3. We don't think he's particularly good, but we don't care because we're only paying him like whatever, barely $1 million or something. And to cut Sanders, they'd have to eat that money and then replace him too. So I think Sanders is staying. He might be like a healthy scratch a lot of weeks, the way like Deontay Foreman had been the past couple of years, where it's like he's a healthy scratch unless the starter gets hurt. In this case, it'll be Javonte Williams. And if Javonte Williams gets hurt, then Sanders could go from a healthy scratch to a guy who gets 15 carries or whatever. But the key here, in my opinion, and the reason why Javonte Williams is clearly the starter, regardless of how bad people think he is or how uniquely talented and fast Jaydon Boutte might be, is that Javonte Williams is the only one of those 3 with any blitz pickup acumen at all. Sanders, he just can't really. He should be better as a passing down guy than he is, but Sanders just clearly doesn't have it as a passing down guy, so it's not going to happen. Javonte Williams, good in blitz pickup, good receiver, has a power element. You can run power concepts with Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders that you just cannot in any situation with Boutte. As far as Boutte and his ADP specifically go, the reason I find it unpalatable is that, in my opinion, the best case scenario for Boutte, like the one where everything works great for him, is pretty much one where he's the 2024 version of Austin Eckler. And Austin Eckler is already Austin Eckler, but goes like 3 rounds later than Jaydon Boutte. So I just don't see it's like a total non-starter to me.
All right, so some running backs who are going shortly after Jaydon Boutte. Tell me if you're taking these guys over him. Trey Benson, Ray Davis, Najee Harris, Rachaad White.
Probably not Harris, and I'm a little, lukewarm at best on Rachaad White. But I don't know, man. If I had to pick between White and Boutte, I'd probably pick White, especially if he's going later. It's not like I'm getting my hopes up exactly, but Bucky Irving is a small running back. I don't think he can hold up with the second half workload that he had last year over the whole course of a year. White showed us in his starting season that he's not like a bum. He's not awful, and he plays passing downs, which Boutte, again, will not do except for designed some routes and mostly designed screens. Because if they leave Jaydon Boutte out there for blitz pickup, he's getting flattened.
All right, let's run through a few more of these, Mario. I told you this morning, you've been doing the Lord's work, digging through the dregs of the New Orleans Saints running back room. Yeah, obviously we know Alvin Kamara, your RB1, but tell me why I need to be concerned about that RB2 job, whether it's Kendre Miller, Devin Neal, or Cam Akers getting those reps.
Yeah, the Saints are paying Kamara in a way that gives you good reason to think he'll be a workhorse for them, playing upwards of 50 snaps a game. But Kamara is not a big running back. He's never been a very power heavy guy, yet he's been getting this sort of overwork for, I don't know, it feels like it's been 5 years in a row now. And he gets nicked up each year, and he might play 15 games or more, but he's getting nicked up. And the older he gets, the more likely one of these nagging injuries just stays nagging and like doesn't really turn a corner in the season. And if they need to put, if Alvin Kamara can't play in a given game, that just blasts open just a massive usage void in that offense, because they barely can answer the question, like, who else is even getting the ball in this offense other than Kamara? It's like you say Olave, but in practice, it's like, how sure are you of that with these quarterbacks? Like, who's actually going to get the ball? Who can you actually give the ball to? After Kamara, there's a lot of scenarios where the answer is just nobody, really. So whoever is up next, if there is one player who kind of claims that running back 2 role, they should get a lot of usage, and to the point maybe that it doesn't even matter if they're a bad running back, which in the cases of Kendre Miller and Devin Neal especially, I think it would be hasty to assume anything especially negative. Kendre Miller, the 3rd round pick out of TCU a couple of years ago, is like, he's had constant injury problems, and the previous coach Dennis Allen made reference to sort of work ethic kind of concerns. So if Miller is a head case or is for whatever reason underachieving, then however talented he might be might not matter. And that would be the way he gets kind of crossed off. In addition to injury, like that's the way it would go badly for Miller. But in this really weak group of candidates, I would put Miller as the very tentative slight favorite, if only because the next 3 are Devin Neal, who's a 6th round rookie and is missing time currently with a hamstring injury. Cam Akers, who of course has 2 Achilles tears at this point, has 0 guaranteed dollars on his 1-year veteran minimum contract. And then Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who just like, who knows what is going on with that guy. So Miller might be the favorite of that group, but it's largely just because the group is so weak, you could barely even think of a competitor. But to me, the big competition is Neal, and I'm kind of I'm taking the leap of faith that the NFL was just sort of wrong to let Devin Neal fall to the 6th round. I think he would have made sense as a 3rd round pick. There's not much upside probably with a guy like Neal. Like, he's not a big play threat in the NFL, but he's just so smooth in pretty much all aspects of running back play. And he was super efficient over massive volume at Kansas, really good runner and receiver both. I just think in the worst case scenario, Devin Neal is a running back who is very skilled and doesn't have great athletic tools. But having great skills in this backfield it's a nice starting point. Like, I don't think you can even really say that about Akers or Clyde Edwards-Helaire. It's certainly not Miller. Miller's all theory, all about athletic, upside theory. So Devin Neal is, I think, in a weird way, even though he's missing this time in training camp, and even though that's a bad sign generally, he might be the most game-ready running back the Saints have after Alvin Kamara.
Could you see a scenario in which the Saints look to offload Alvin Kamara? I know they just signed him into an extension last year, and I'd have to look into the money on that. But it's just it's such a clear misfit in terms of player performance, point in career versus where the rest of the team is at.
Yeah, they'd have to do something funny, I guess, because they're on the hook for through 2026, but it's almost all guaranteed, and they even have a couple void years with like $8 million more in signing bonus cap hits. So it's extremely expensive, this contract that the Saints have given him, to the point that if anyone were willing to trade with Kamara, the other team would probably have to eat so much money, or the Saints would have to eat so much money that it's not even really worth it either way. So I think the Saints more realistically are kind of just toast. They're a terrible team that has not done a good job of rebuilding itself. Its front office is very clearly one of the worst in the NFL. And this Kamara contract could very well be another bullet point in the list of evidence on that front.
Truly one of the bleakest outlooks I can remember in a while for any team. And the Tyler Shough situation, I think, at least what we're hearing so far, only adds to that. All right, let's zip through a couple more, Mario. Taking a look at some wide receivers in New England. Obviously, we know Stephon Diggs brought in to be the number 1. Certainly sounds like Pop Douglas, is locking down that slot role. But we're looking at Kayshon Boutte, Kyle Williams, Mack Hollins. If you want to throw Jalen Polk and Javon Baker and Kendrick Bourne in there, we can. These guys who feel like they've just been on this roster for years doing nothing. But that wide receiver 3 job in New England, is there anybody you like for that?
This could be a frustrating passing game because Drake May, in my opinion, looks quite good. And there's going to be all these flashy plays where, depending on the receiver that's catching the ball, you can sort of watch that play and tell yourself, like, oh, this is a real thing we're seeing here. If Kyle Williams, out sprints some corner and man coverage and just doesn't break stride, catching a perfectly landed go route from Drake May, it'll be a circus. So it's hard to tell whether, in my opinion, other than Stephon Diggs, it's hard to tell whether any of those guys, any of those other receivers, will get predictable repeated usage, as opposed to just sort of devolving into kind of like a very horizontally oriented rotation, a committee, you could almost say. So with that said, though, in the meantime, the top three pretty clearly is, like you said, Demario Douglas in the slot, Stephon Diggs at the flanker rep, and Kayshon Boutte at the X rep, which is basically what he played last year, and he did a pretty good job. Still just 23 years old, by the way, and if Boutte didn't have certain character concerns at LSU, he might have gone earlier, like quite a bit earlier in his draft, and he might be regarded right now as a more conventional, standout prospect instead of like a fringe prospect, which is certainly as of last year, that was more the thought. But it sounds like Boutte must be doing pretty well in camp to hold off a guy like Kyle Williams. Kyle Williams seems pretty good in his own right, and at the very least, Kyle Williams offers this downfield speed that the Patriots pretty clearly lack. Like even Boutte is a 4.45 kind of guy. That 4.4 flat that Kyle Williams ran might not seem like a big difference, but there kind of is. You see with a guy like Williams, it's like this is the kind of speed that a defense actually kind of gets worried about, whereas Boutte is sort of just fast enough to play X receiver downfield a little bit. So I'm not expecting, I think it's like a good collection of players, but maybe a better real life collection of players. And specifically something like Boutte and Kyle Williams, it's like I don't really know where the targets come from for them, especially if Mack Hollins, he's the other one taking some of the X snaps. If he's coming in as like a blocking specialist or whatever he's supposed to be, that presses the margins even further for Boutte and Williams, and they probably can't have their margins pressed and also be useful in fantasy, if only because guys like Douglas, Diggs, and I think Hunter Henry, I think that offense is going to go a lot of two tight end too. Like Austin Hooper had something like 450 yards last year. So Hunter Henry, Austin Hooper, again, very horizontally oriented passing game where I think it's like Drake May is going to look good. We're going to get hopped up on the idea of like some breakout or another occurring, but it's probably just Diggs and Douglas who get targets regularly enough to give fantasy investors what they're hoping for.
All right, quickly, I want to hit a couple quarterback situations, but first, Mario, I want to throw you one that you did not write about, but it has a little bit of the Giants thing to it, where you're like, man, who cares? It's the Cleveland Browns; they're going to be terrible. There is fantasy value to be had, and I have no idea what's going to happen with Quentin Judkins. I mean, we've just been radio silent on that front. At the very least, he's missing extremely valuable reps in camp. Who knows if he's going to be on the field at any point? Looking at ADP right now, the other two Cleveland backs, Dylan Sampson, Jerome Ford, are back-to-back in running back ADP. You're running back 48 and 49. Do you have any lean on how that backfield plays out if we just remove Quentin Judkins from the situation for the time being?
It's reasonable enough that people look at Dylan Sampson, the fourth rounder from this year, and assume that he has more upside than a guy like Ford, who was a fifth-round pick, I think, out of Cincinnati. And the last few years, Ford has been the designated passing down guy for the Browns, especially in blitz pickup. It's been Ford pretty much all the time, such that Ford actually has one of the highest running back snap counts over the last 2 years. He's got to be like top 20 or something like that. So Ford is a guy who's played a lot, has a well-established history of earning the trust of Kevin Stefanski, crucially in passing down situations. And in my opinion, even if it is true that Dylan Sampson has more upside from scrimmage, especially as a pure runner, than Jerome Ford, he might need development time that basically leaves Ford with the advantage, at least in 2025, which is the last year of his deal, and then he'll be gone next year. So the way I see it is, for Dylan Sampson to catch up with Ford on those passing down situations would require like rapid, major progress. Because to me, Sampson looked pretty awful as a blitz pickup guy at Tennessee. And despite the running backs coach Deuce Staley mentioning Sampson lining up at receiver in camp or whatever, I'm skeptical of that because Sampson's pass catching production certainly wasn't very good. And when you watch him catch passes, like I don't think he looks like a very good receiver either. So I'm not expecting Dylan Sampson to play many passing down snaps. When he is on the field for a passing play, I think it's going to be like a design screen or something like that, which you can't scale that up very much. Like you need to be able to contribute in base package play calls. And I think for those purposes, Sampson is probably just a rushing specialist this year. He might be a better pure runner than Ford, but honestly, I don't even take that for a given because Sampson ran a 4.45 pro day 40 at exactly 200 pounds, which is basically a Kenneth Gainwell workout, by the way. Whereas Jerome Ford had the 4.46 at the combine and at 10 pounds heavier. And Jerome Ford was a totally productive player at Cincinnati and Alabama in college. So you see people assume that Sampson has more upside and that Ford is kind of like just a retread or something, but I don't see it that way. I think Ford's the clear starter, honestly, if Judkins is out.
All right, we got to talk about the quarterback situations, Mario. The Indianapolis Colts, they play their first preseason game tonight. Anthony Richardson will get the start. He'll play into the second quarter. At least that's what they're telling us. And then we'll see Daniel Jones, who has already been announced as the second preseason game starter. Does it matter to you when you're looking at the receivers in this offense? Because I think it's obvious. If Richardson's starting games, there's going to be 20-plus fantasy point potential. I think you said it well on XM earlier today that there's there's not necessarily a through line, between a quarterback like him having a good real life game versus having a good fantasy game. But if you're a Josh Downs or Michael Pittman or Tyler Warren investor, do you have a preference between those two?
This is complicated for me because in real life, like if I was handling the Colts, I would just go with Richardson. Like I see truly no point at all to a Daniel Jones era. It's like we already did that. It was bleak. Richardson has been bleak too, but I think there's a way you could run an offense that would make him maybe acceptable as a starter, whereas I just point blank do not see any such possibility for Jones. However, for fantasy purposes, for the pass catchers, it's pretty much the opposite. At least for everybody other than Alec Pierce, they would prefer Daniel Jones, I think, because, and this is a very low bar, Daniel Jones can complete 60% of his passes. That's still below average in today's NFL. Something more like 65 plus would be a worthwhile number. Jones, I don't think can really get there. Maybe he will with receivers this good. Who knows? But with Richardson, in the meantime, it's like you'd call it a miracle, borderline miracle, if he completes like 57% of his passes over a month of games. So Josh Downs, I think, Josh Downs and Pittman, I think, have the most to gain from Daniel Jones, just because guys like that, especially because they're good at underneath targets, like the only area Daniel Jones can throw the ball. Those two guys, Downs and Pittman, I think, gain quite rapidly when they switch from Richardson to Jones. Alec Pierce, and I guess if Pierce were benched or something, or if Pittman were hurt or Pierce was hurt, Adonai Mitchell would benefit from Richardson, because Pierce especially is just, he's a downfield, he's a go route merchant. And that's kind of the only route Richardson can throw at all. Like he likes to chuck it downfield, and Pierce, guy that tall and fast, it's kind of hard to miss him. But Daniel Jones probably doesn't really have like the courage to make those, or belligerence, however you'd like to say it, to make those throws.
All right. Well, same question for the New Orleans Saints. We'll end on this, Mario. It feels like, based on the Tyler Shough reports so far, based on what I've seen, there's at least a higher baseline, you would think, with Spencer Rattler. Now, using the term higher baseline very relatively here, but what is the Saints' goal this season? Like, you don't see tanking in the NFL. The equivalent of the Saints in the NBA would be they'd be going full Utah Jazz mode, right? They're like, we're trying to win 14 games. We're trying to get the number one pick, and we'll move on from there. But we don't see that in the NFL. And I think ideally, based on where they drafted Tyler Shough, I think the idea was that he would have a good chance to be the starter. It certainly sounds like he's played his way out of that. Now, I don't think that means that we don't see him at some point this year, but this is not quite the same question, because it's really just Chris Olave, to a lesser degree Rashid Shaheed, and that's kind of about it as far as pass catchers go for the Saints. But I think this can impact Alvin Kamara in some ways. Like, do you feel any differently about the Saints offense, assuming that it's going to be Rattler, at least to begin the year?
I like that their offensive line should be a little better. The Calvin Banks selection, moving Fuaga to right tackle, moving Penning to guard, that's all stuff that should be pretty good. But with quarterbacks like these, like, we're really pressing the limits of how bad a quarterback can be while an offense still stays vaguely acceptable by NFL standards. Like, I think Rattler was not a good prospect and was not encouraging last year. So if Rattler is a younger player than Shough and as a 5th round pick rather than a top 40 pick, is still outclassing Shough in practice, that's the kind of thing where it's like we might as well just end this Shough thing right now. Like what could possibly turn out for good in this if he can't even like if Shough decisively pushed aside Rattler to win this job, it still would mean nothing about whether Shough was any good. Like he could be just terrible, and still he as a terrible quarterback should be able to push aside a guy like Rattler, but apparently cannot. So maybe this changes rapidly in the next however many days, but short of that, I think it's far from a bold take to suggest that the Saints might be the worst team in the NFL. And you're right, there is no tanking. I think that's basically because very few front offices feel like they have the job security to start a tank and see it through. They they rightfully suspect, like, hey, if I start tanking and I do an awesome job, even then I might just get fired for some other jerk who comes in and like gets all the easy pickings from all these draft selections I've accumulated by tanking. So they instead, maybe you could say they try to go halfway, but I think more likely it's just they kind of just are in a constant state of trying to consolidate power. And from the coach's perspective, that means just avoiding negative headlines, avoiding losses ideally. But those coaches also don't want, the nightmare for any NFL head coach is probably like a New York Post article. It's like calling them a bozo because they went for it on 4th down and didn't get it and lost some stupid game or whatever. So like Kellen Moore has no interest in no interest that I can see in tanking. The front office for the Saints needs to be just torn out and fully replaced. I doubt they feel like they have the job security to tank. So yeah, it's going to be this just kind of mangled, ineffective project of a team that has no coherent like set of goals and plans to meet those goals.
Well, that's what makes them so tough to evaluate. Like I am certain that this is probably the worst roster in the NFL. I don't know if they're going to lose the most games just because of the schedule for Cleveland and for the Giants, but that would be my bet. They have Olave.
They can't trade Kamara because of his contract, but trade Olave. And Shaheed. It's the only humane thing to do.
This is what I was going to ask you. Like, is there a world for job preservation purposes, for PR purposes? Because you're totally right. There's a difference between losing 20-13 and losing like 48-6. Like there's a huge difference in terms of perception. Could they look to bring in, a Tyrod Taylor type, at some point this season, just to like say, hey, we have a baseline that we need to meet here.
It's funny. It's like if Kirk Cousins had been signed by any other team, both in the sense that the Falcons front office is ridiculous too. Like the Saints and the Falcons front offices are just they're just ridiculous people. But like if Kirk Cousins had been on any other team, I think he would be getting traded to the Saints right now. Yes. But the Falcons don't want to trade Cousins in general because they're still doing this EPA based nonsense where they're like, he's worth 3 first-round picks in EPA, and so we're not going to trade him. But we're also not going to let him start because we spend a top 10 pick on Penix. But like, especially because it's the Saints that would be calling in the division, they don't want Cousins there. They want to just keep him in a cage instead. So they will.
All right, well, that's a good spot to cut it off. Highly encourage you to check out Mario's article breaking down all these job battles in detail. You can find that over at rotowire.com. You see it right there on your screen. If you're watching along on YouTube, put that code YouTube15 in at checkout, 15% off any of our subscriptions over at rotowire.com. Want to thank all of our sponsors, Circa, Vegas Football Proxy. If you're playing in Survivor, if you're playing in Millions this year, make sure you got a proxy. Go check out Vegas Football Proxy. And Commishkit as well. Put in that code ROTO over at commishkit.com. You get 10% off. Mario, appreciate you allowing me to jump in for the great John McKechnie.
Thanks for saving us.
He'll be back from Croatia, just gallivanting around Europe. He'll be back next week. We'll have our full schedule rolling as we move into week 2 of the NFL preseason.